So our recording ended a little abruptly, but basically we have connected React and Django. To go all the way back to our notes, we talked about transpiling. We're using the vite build tool. We have our project structure and we have our project config. And the key thing is this base route that gets injected into all of our front-end code when we have code that's looking for image assets. And the directory that the vite build goes to need to line up with what we tell Django. So that Django knows, look, on this, the URL for static assets is this, and the directory for static assets is here. And as Zainab solved the issue that I ran into, and issues like this are really common, is that in our code before, because these image assets we're using JavaScript to import, and then instead of like hard coding a URL here like we had before with it was something like this. We are passing in whatever this is, and really the vite build tool and the node module system are doing the work of figuring out that path. That means that when we run vite build, vite can like set that path correctly to find this image asset for us, which is what we want now, which is awesome. And that was the issue that we debugged. And we now have, you know, I'm running two terminals. I've got my web server running and I've got my client, and we have to run build all the time. And the good news is the vite build script, if you look under options, and this is how we discovered this when we started deciding to use vite, has a watch option. And it gets a little crazy because vite is using a tool called rollup. So we would have to Google rollup watcher and read exactly like what this does. It does exactly what we think. It rebuilds the bundle when the file changes, which is exactly what we want. Vite really should, their documentation should be better, but that's another story. So I'm going to go ahead and add that watch script. We're going to add that to our package.json right here, which is going to be great. Before I do that, I'm going to commit my code. So I am going to navigate back a bit, and now I'm in the project root directory. And we're in the demos and notes repo. So it's not quite the same. And in fact, I'm going to navigate a level back into the demos and notes repo and do git status just to see what's going on. And basically this whole directory is a track, right? So I'm going to add that directory. Well, we'll just do this. All these new files that I've added. You know, I actually forgot to add on the server side code, in our Git, we probably do want to ignore that static directory here. So I think what I'll do is I will add another gitignore file. And we'll ignore static. Now, depending on how you deploy, you may or may not want to do this, but the idea here is we want the source code because that's what we generate the bundled asset from. So I don't want to check this bundle into GitHub. I want the source. I want the instructions. And then when you want to work on this, you clone this repository and you run the build script. And then that way you make sure that if I've changed the source code, you get the most recent build and we don't have like some old build checked in to version control there. So I'm actually going to delete these directories inside static, which is safe because the build script is what will rebuild them. And let's do clear, let's do git status. All these deleted things are there. Let's do git status again. And now if I skim through here, I can see it's just my source code that's being tracked in version control. Oh, I moved a little too far out. And now we've got the full stack app, basic structure and config. And part of the reason I wanted to do that commit and show it to everyone right now is because I do want to show a cool part of GitHub, which is I have all of that in one commit now, right? And if you want, you can go and look at this. There's a bit much here, but you can see most of the critical changes or steps that need to be made for a project config. I really should have done it in smaller steps like I'm about to do now. And let me show you why. Let's add a watch script here. Super simple, right? And NPM scripts, by the way, just as a friendly reminder, we could do vite build on the command line. We could do vite build watch. There might be some path related things, but essentially that is what this NPM script is doing for us. It just gives us a consistent interface for doing those things. And now I should be able to run NPM run build watch. You could also just call it watch if you want, really up to you. And it looks like I made a mistake. Let's see here. Oh, I'm probably in the wrong directory. Now let's try that again. Actually, I might just name this watch, just to keep it simple. I think I'm going to stick with build watch actually, because it is a proper build. And this is a syntax you'll see like when you want to sort of have different variations of an NPM script. And now that's working. And if I go here and if I change something, and in fact, let's test this out. Let me make sure my server is running, which it should be. So if I go over, not here, not here, not here, but over here to our site, I refresh the page, we see what we expect, the app works. Let's make a simple change to make sure that all of this is working as we expect here in app.jsx. Here we go. Let's just say the awesome count is, I run this. I should see this build changed again. If I look over here, if we were watching here, we would have seen that happen. And now, so I do have to refresh the page. We don't have that nice hot module reloading that the vite dev server does. And a more complex config is to run the vite dev server and Django and not have Django host the front end app. But now at least we've got that going. So now we're confirmed that this works, which is great. And I'm going to go ahead and commit this. And in fact, I'm going to open up a third terminal, which is going to sort of be my project root. And if I type git status, I see I really only made a tiny change. In fact, I don't want the change I made to the source directory. So I'm going to get rid of it. I'm going to add the one that I made there. And the reason I wanted to walk through this as well was just to demonstrate, like, especially on your personal projects and group projects, as things start to get more complex, having very small commits with a nice little descriptive message, and then looking through the commits in GitHub is a great way to see things. And like, this is often how you will learn and explore and understand a code base in the work environment. So now if you want to see how to add the build watch script, you have one place where you can go to see all the files you need to change to make that change. And I think the next step for us is, we're coming up, we've got about 10 minutes. So I'm not sure if it makes sense to dive into the Django REST stuff too much, but I can at least give a preview. And let me check into it. Do folks have any questions? So there's a great library for Django called Django REST Framework. It's going to make our lives easier for a lot of the things that we do. Looking at the install guide is always a good starting point. It looks like this is some extra stuff. Looking at the quick start is always a good starting point. So I'm just going to go ahead and install the REST framework, and I might as well install these things. I'm not sure what we need them for, but they say we want them. So let's go ahead and do that. And we'll see what this REST framework does in a moment. And because we're making changes to Django, I'm going to kill the Django server. I'm going to make sure I'm in the right spot. I haven't created a requirements.txt, but I will in a bit. I'm going to make sure my virtual environment is activated, which it is. I can tell from looking on the command line prompt. So pip install Django REST framework. And we're going to be using the Django REST framework for a lot of stuff for the rest of class. Awesome. It's installed, just skimming through these messages. Some things that it wants were already installed, some other libraries, so that's great. I'm going to install the Markdown library, which is more for like creating really nice API documentation, which we can look at later. I don't know why they need this. Because they have it in the install steps, I'm going to install it so I don't potentially run into any problems. Awesome. And now I do want to create a requirements.txt file. I believe that's with pip freeze. Yep. And let's pipe that into requirements.txt. And now if I do git status, what has changed? Just the requirements.txt. If I go up a level into my project root and do git status, again, just requirements.txt because I'm ignoring this vim file with my gitignore file. And deps is short for dependencies. And so now again, like we have a very nice clean commit where if I want to see what do I need to install Django REST framework, it's right there in one spot. Let's see, how are we on time? So I think let me go ahead and demonstrate what we can do with Django REST framework, and let me do that relatively quickly, so we can have that to look at if we want to. And what we'll do too, I think, is after the talk, we'll talk about the afternoon. And we can look at this a bit more too if we want. So Django REST framework basically makes it a lot easier to handle JSON in requests and responses and things like that. Oh, and the one thing I do need to do, I need to finish installing and setting up Django REST framework. I jumped ahead a little bit. We need to add this to our installed apps. And we'll just put this down at the bottom right there. Which is great. And what I'm actually going to do is so I did a little bit of fanciness, and I'll explain why in a second. I basically squashed two commits together in Git because I do want to have everything we need for Django REST framework in one commit. And I had forgotten adding that to settings.py. So now we have one commit, and this shows everything you need to do to install Django REST framework. Obviously, this doesn't show the pip install, but it shows the dependencies for Django. So that's the main thing. So now let's actually do something with Django REST framework and see what it does that makes it so exciting. And we haven't, created a Django app. We haven't connected the database. We haven't done a lot. So I am going to kind of create a fake route. We're going to make a view function called whoami. And if we were logged in, this would return our user information. And here's the cool thing that we get with Django REST framework. For one thing, we can tell it what kind of HTTP request this view will accept. I probably do have to do a little bit of importing because we are using a decorator. So from REST framework dot decorators import API view. Excuse me. And this restricts this request to handling an HTTP GET request or POST request or so on. So we could have POST, we could have more than one. I believe it also will parse JSON that comes in for us without having to worry about it. If we're sending JSON back, or if we're receiving JSON on this request. And I think I do want to send a JSON response back, and let's see if that is, yep. And let's try returning, and let's add a print statement, just so we know which route gets called. And let's return. And am I right in thinking the JSON response takes a dictionary? And I could use a little help here if this looks correct, folks. And we'll find out in a minute. And that's the docstring error, which, by the way, we can solve with, well, by putting a Python docstring there. Actually, I should look at the JSON response to make sure that it HTTP response class that consumes data to be dumped to JSON. Oh, so it looks like we probably need to maybe do it a bit more like this. Or let's just call this user. Let's see if that works. So I'm actually going to test this route out right now. I haven't gotten to the CSRF stuff, and so maybe we'll take a quick look at that after the guest speaker talk, or maybe we'll start with that tomorrow morning. So my Django server is running, which is great. And now let's see here. So that's working. I haven't created my route. That is the one piece of the puzzle here I haven't done yet. So we should go ahead and do that. Path, whoami, use dot whoami, and then we want a comma.
You missed the S in view.
Oh, thank you so much. Perfect. And server.use has no. That looks like it's more of a VS Code issue because I'm seeing the same thing over here, unless I'm totally goofing on something. Let me restart the server. And this works. And let's see if this whoamiroute works. It does, which is great. So, we're not doing a ton with Django REST framework yet, but we're going to be building onto it more. And more importantly, what we can start doing is, I know I'm squeezing this into the last 2 minutes here, but in our client code, we can use axios. Yeah, Icarus, I think the plan, like the assignment today, I think really will be build your own project following this guide from today and add a couple features. I know, I don't think we actually had an assignment. I know Zainab is working on something.
Yeah, I'm working on one right now. It'll be basically that, just building your own full stack application and playing around with the capabilities.
Awesome. And if I check git status, so I've talked a lot about, doing small chunks of work and committing, and this is a great example. We now have created a route, like we've tested that it works. Let's make a commit. And now let's go on and add in axios. So axios should be added. I'm going to double check and look in the package.json. Actually, even better, I'm just going to do git status. And if I do git diff, it will show me those changes. And I see that axios has been installed, which is great. I kind of like committing after like adding a dependency because it's very clean. So that's just a commit saying we now have axios as a front-end dependency. Now let's see about using axios, and I might need a little help here to get this one working. And it's going to be very simple. And in fact, let me look at their sort of hello world. So we want to import axios, which probably is going to look something like this. Import. Can someone help me out? Is this
No
right?
curly braces.
No curlies?
Mhm.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what I was wondering about. And just very simply here in the app, I'm just going to do axios dot get. And let me double check the syntax. Slash who am I? And the callback will be response. Let's see, I need the dot then for the callback. So dot then. And I kind of like to write, like when I'm in JavaScript, these like methods, the dot method, dot another method, it's called method chaining, right? We call this method or function, and that returns something that gets passed into this one. I kind of like to write it this way, because to me, it's a bit more readable. Let's just see if we get that working. And I probably do have to make sure that my server's running. And this is where it does get a bit more complicated because we have these moving parts. Like I need to have my build watch script running. And you probably will want to have multiple terminal windows open. And it takes a little while, but then you'll get used to it. And over here, so this works, which is great. And in the console, we have all this information. And I think what we want is response dot data. Let's try that. And there we go. I'm not sure why we're running into this vite SVG issue again. It's probably from the index.html. But now we've got an Axios request. It's going over to our server. Our Django server is serving back that data. And our Django web server application is both hosting our React app and being the API for it. And it's just past 11:30, so I think this is a perfect time to pause and see if people have any questions, but we should break because the 12:30 talk, I think we'll have a hard start because it's a guest. So let's do this. Let me stop recording